Thanks, Paul, for that introduction. Yeah, so I'll be speaking tonight about the Scaled Agile Framework. And just to show of hands, how many people have heard of the Scaled Agile Framework before tonight? Okay, a few people, that's good. All right, so my goal tonight is twofold. I want to impart sort of a knowledge of what is the Scaled Agile Framework, and then I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. Because I know a lot of you guys are doing Agile, or your company is attempting to do Agile, and I'm really interested in hearing some of the feedback. You guys liking it? What are you not liking about it? And so then we can have sort of like a fireside chat about some of the experiences that I've had and some of the coaching that I provide, and maybe that'll help you in dealing with some of those issues. Okay. So just a little bit more about myself. I've been in the software development industry for a little over 25 years. I started out as a developer, as a computer science major at San Diego State. And so I was a developer for 15 years, and I started out with C, then to C++, then to Java, kind of the natural progression. And then I went into management, and I continued to do software development, not nearly as much as I used to, but my son is a computer science major, so I find myself tutoring him quite a bit. And in fact, he's taken a Java programming class this semester, so I'm getting my hands into the code again, which is great. So then after I was a manager for a few years, I became a consultant. And oh, by the way, so while I was a manager is when I got really interested in this whole Agile concept, just the whole idea of how do you manage software development teams. At the time, the company I was working for was following more of a traditional methodology, also known as waterfall methodology, and everybody knew that this doesn't work. Even all the managers knew it doesn't work, but those were the marching orders we had. They said, hey, this is the best we've got, you have to follow it. So a lot of documentation, a lot of ways of doing development that just didn't make any sense. But that's what I was stuck with. But while I was a manager, I got familiar with this whole Agile Manifesto, which we'll talk about in a bit. But really, it was sort of me trying to figure out how to apply a lot of this stuff. And as I did, I learned that, okay, it's still kind of in its baby phases. Trying to apply it at scale, even fewer people were doing. But the companies I was working for really needed to apply it at scale. So that's what got me interested in researching, well, how are people applying Agile at scale? And so more on that. And then I became a consultant, and I've been a consultant now for 10 years. And I do a lot of coaching around Agile, and I do a lot of speaking, like I am tonight, to different venues, like Project Management Institute venues. Also, Agile itself, the Agile community has a lot of events where I get to speak and talk to other thought leaders. And I do a lot of coaching. That's what I do most of the time. I travel the country, and I do a lot of coaching to teams that are trying to apply the Scaled Agile Framework. As it's been said, Agile is very simple ideas, but trying to apply it actually takes a lot of work. So to really try to apply Agile concepts and principles, you really need some help. You need somebody that's either done it many times before and comes in as a manager, or you need to bring in outside help. So it's got some contact information there, and I'll share a lot of these slides with Paul, and if you want to just make it available to the group, that's great. All right, so I've got a few of my credentials here I picked up over the years. The one I'm most proud of is this one here, Scaled Agile Framework Program Consultant. So this is something I'll talk about some more tonight, is this, the Scaled Agile Framework is very quickly replacing, and this is kind of my own little input here, the Scrum Alliance, which has been for many years the authority on everything Agile. Now this is kind of becoming little more passé, and this is actually picking up. It's really, now there's a global presence. And what this is doing, the Scaled Agile Framework, is applying a lot of these concepts at scale. So it's becoming quickly the de facto standard for Agile certification. All right, so here's kind of tonight, I said, I have a twofold mission. So we're going to talk about, what SAFE is, which is kind of short for the Scaled Agile Framework. It used to be just SAF, but then they wanted to pronounce it, so they put a little E at the end, so you can call it SAFE. But so that stands for the Scaled Agile Framework. We'll talk about what the program means, SAFE for programs. And then we'll talk about the concept of running a release train, and then leading an Agile teams. And then, like I said, we'll leave quite a bit for Q&A. I'm interested in hearing your feedback on my presentation. So let's go ahead and get started with what Agile is. When we talk about Agile, by the way, how many of you guys are working at a company that's trying to apply Agile? About half of you? Okay, sort of. I see a lot of this.
You make it difficult because you said trying to apply.
That's right.
Some
exactly.
of us think we're
Something
succeeding.
actually doing
Okay,
it.
good. And then trying and actually succeeding, and if not succeeding, then trying. Good, about half of you. So really the concept is very simple, right? I mean, if you think about what this word means in the English dictionary, it's defined like this. It's able to move quickly and easily, well coordinated, and adaptable. And so some of the synonyms are active, nimble, quick, spry, alert, responsive. And that's really how business is trying to become. Not just development teams, not just programming teams, but entire businesses are finding that they have to become agile in order to survive in the 21st century. Not that they didn't need to be before, but now it's a matter of survival. And really, that's what's fueling this whole move and drive to become more agile. It's not that it's a neat way of doing development. It's more of the way you need to become as a business in order to survive. So a lot of the demand for my services come from CFOs, CEOs, CTOs, more from them than from software development teams. So I'm getting a call saying, hey, we really need you to come in and talk to our engineering team. So the business is actually wanting to become more agile. So look at the kind of the opposite. What's the anti-agile, right? So it's words like lethargic, slow, clumsy, awkward. Does that kind of describe some of the companies that some of us work for? I know it describes some of the companies I used to work for, especially lethargic. I worked for some government-related companies, and I'm telling you, every day, I think I looked at my watch like a dozen times in the first 5 minutes. I mean, it was just slow. So Agile is kind of the complete opposite. It's being able to move, being able to be responsive, but then trying to become more collaborative too. So another in the context that we're talking about is how to collaborate more efficiently. Okay, so the first wave of Agile development that came was in about 2000 timeframe. These were the first books that came out. Anybody remember these books? Cool. Yeah, I remember getting this book and reading it cover to cover. And just,
that was crazy.
Yeah, it was absolutely insane, and I fell in love with it right away. So extreme programming, that's still a very popular. And then Scrum kind of became the more, how to apply Agile concepts. And a lot of you guys have probably been through Scrum Master training. Anybody have Scrum certified Scrum Master? Yeah, a few of you guys. So this has become pretty much synonymous with Agile. So when you say Agile and Scrum, to most people it's kind of synonymous. What really Scrum is applying, kind of becoming, prescribing practices to become Agile. And then this other book, User Stories Applied. So these were the first books that came on the shelves of people that were sort of the pioneers of Agile. But it's been 13 years now, and these were more focused on product development teams. So it came out of product development or software development, And so the focus here was on how can teams become more collaborative, more efficient, how to write better code that's well tested. But now it's been about 12 years or so, and now we're getting this second wave of Agile adoption. And really the focus is on business agility. How can the entire business, not just software development, but the entire business, we're talking all the pieces, product management, quality, even the HR and sales, how can they become more agile? Because we need to move faster. And so here are some of the books that are, I think, sort of the key books right now. By the way, if you go on Amazon and you type Agile software or Agile development, how many hits do you think you'll get?
Hundreds to thousands.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I've lost track, but these are the three that stand out. And there's another half a dozen or so that I really recommend. But these three really stand out. And the one on the left here, Agile Software Requirements, this is where a lot of tonight's talk is coming out of. So if the stuff that I talk about tonight really interests you, I highly recommend getting this book by Dean Leffingwell. Okay, so focus is now on business agility. And so here's a quote from The Lean Startup, which is kind of a landmark book. It came out, I think, a year and a half or so ago. And it says, a startup is a human institution designed to deliver a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. It has nothing to do with the size of the company, sector of the economy, or industry. So I would say in the 21st century, you have even the large companies are seeing themselves as startups because they have to move quickly. They can't depend on their old customer base that they've had for a long time. They have to be ready to move very fast. So, so here are some of the thought leaders that are really sort of at the cutting edge. They're coming up with new content. I highly recommend that you follow them on Twitter if this area interests you. So Dean Leffingwell, I've already mentioned. Jeff Sutherland, he is the co-creator of Scrum. And who's heard of this character here? Uncle Bob Martin.
Uncle Bob.
Yeah. So if you're a developer, this is a guy you got to get to know. He's funny, he's smart, he's just a wealth of wisdom and experience. And then Don Reinertson, probably very few of you have heard, he is sort of the guru of lean thinking. And his books are really well received. And so the Scaled Agile Framework kind of leverages the ideas of these thought leaders quite a bit. So if you look at historically, starting with the 1970s, is when we started getting into this whole, let's come up with a software process. And the software processes that we started having in the 1970s were more kind of like manufacturing. So they followed this, first you do your analysis, then you do your design, then you do your implementation, then you do your testing, and then you release. So very quickly it was found that doesn't work well with software because software is very exploratory. So we had these different methodologies come on the scene into the 80s and 90s. And really the early 2000s is when we saw this Scrum and XP and a lot of its sibling sort of concepts. And really 2006 is when Dean Leffingwell published his first book called Scaling Agility. And now what you're seeing is companies now want to embrace this enterprise agility model. And here are some of the companies we're talking about. So in town, one of my big clients, anybody here from Mitchell International? So they're a big proponent of this, but there's a lot of other companies looking into it in San Diego, but in Orange County, but then a lot of Fortune 500 companies that are back east. Most of my clients are back east right now. They're embracing it. So this came on the scene just a few years ago, and now if I were to come back in 5-6 years and talk about Agile, do you think there would be something else? Most likely, right? I mean, these are evolutionary steps. But right now, this is the best we've got for what businesses are looking for. And that's why over the last 2 years, it's really caught on like wildfire. I'm part of a team, it's called the Scaled Agile Academy. And we certify individuals that want to do training and learn more and be change agents within their company. And over the last 2 years, like 2,500 people have gone through the course. And more courses are being offered, and they're all sold out. So it's catching on really, really fast. So a lot of you guys are probably already familiar with the Agile Manifesto. This is what came out in 2001, and this is what rocked the world of software development in 2001. And I'll just review them real quickly in case you haven't seen it before. But what it says is we're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we've come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And responding to change over following a plan. So this is what was published in 2001 on the internet, and it just, everybody that read it just really knew, I mean, it just really resonated with a lot of the software development community. And then there's 12 other things. I'm not going to go through all 12, but I'm just going to point out some of the important things. And here's a key piece, that business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. So none of this throwing it over the wall and saying, hey, let me know when you're done. It's really important the business people and the developers work together. The other is, you want to build projects around motivated individuals. Give them the environment and support they need, and trust them to get the job done. So in other words, you want self-motivated, self-managing teams, and rather than micromanaging your software developers. And then a couple of other things I want to point out is, it says the most efficient and effective methods of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. This is a radical departure from, let me give you a spec that is going to tell you exactly what you need to code. So that whole thing is completely the opposite of what the Agile Manifesto was saying, was that you need to actually have a conversation. It's not a monologue, it's a conversation. And I find this is probably one of the toughest areas to overcome, because there's two parties here. There's the business, but then there's also the developers. And I would say right now, developers are losing. Developers are the one that are not engaging in the conversation. From what I'm seeing, the business wants to engage in a conversation. Developers are saying, "Okay, just tell me what I need to code." And so this is an area I want to challenge developers to say, no, you got to engage in this conversation. You got to push back. You got to ask good questions. It's got to be a two-way street. And then finally, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. Okay, so this is this whole concept of continuous improvement, that the teams do. They do development for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month, and then they say, okay, well, let's talk about how that could have gone better. What are some changes we need to make? You know, it could be our facility. It could be our the way we're receiving our requirements. It could be all kinds of things. But we need to have that introspection or retrospection and figure out ways to do things better. So this is the Agile Manifesto, and now in order to scale that, so that the focus of that, the manifesto, was how to do it in one team. But we all know that if very large projects don't happen with one team, they happen with a large group of people. And what we're finding more and more is that these teams are geographically dispersed. Anybody work with India? Yeah. I'm surprised. Usually everybody's hand goes up. Australia, okay. So teams are popping up all over the globe. With the internet, it's thought that it's not that hard to do geographically distributed development. And it's certainly become a lot easier. But in order to build large things, I mean, if you think about how much software has been developed since one of these came out, who remembers when the first iPhone was announced? What year was it?
2006 or 7?
January 2007. How many apps do you think came out in the first year?
Well, they didn't have the SDK right away, so none. Or
Actually, there was some SDK that if you were an Apple developer, elite, you got the SDK, but there was not that many.
you had to jailbreak it to put apps on it for several
Well, but
months.
in 2 years after the iPhone came out, you had over 5,000 apps for the iPhone. How many apps do you think there are today?
20 or 30,000 or something. No, that's just the-
20 or 30,000. Who thinks higher? How much higher?
200,000.
200,000. Who says higher?
Oh, a million?
It's just under 1 million
Yeah.
apps.
Oh.
Okay, there's just under 1 million apps for the iPhone. And we're talking 5-6 years, right? So there's enormous changes going on. How many websites do you think there are that are actually dynamic websites? I mean, there are millions and millions, right? So who's writing all this software?
Some kid who's in
And we're talking, hundreds of billions of lines of code here that are being developed. So software is going everywhere. Medical devices, it's going into TVs, it's going into the internet, it's going to mobile phones, into cars. So it's really important to realize, how are we going to scale this thing, right? Just saying, hey, if you have a startup with 5-6 people, follow Scrum, doesn't cut it anymore. We got to do a lot better than that. Okay, so this is the Scaled Agile Framework's mission, is how do we take the things that work on small teams and apply them at scale? Companies like Apple have, globally, they have thousands of developers that have to work together on a big project, thousands. And so Scaled Agile Framework, it's a proven publicly facing framework for applying lean and agile practices at enterprise scale. And the key word here is proven. So there's a lot of already proven techniques that have gone, it's field tested. So it's not just some theorist coming up with, hey, here's a theoretical way to do it. It's actually been out there, it's been used, not just for software, not for software only companies, but software, hardware, firmware, mechanical devices. You take a company like Apple, they do it all. They have manufacturing, they do, of course, a ton of software, but they build hardware. The same goes for a company like Amazon. Right? They build a Kindle, they have the website, they do elastic computing. So there's whatever framework that they adopt has to support things at very large scale, and it has to be distributable. Right? You can't say that, well, it'll only work if we're all in the same building. Yes?
What aspect of lean is pulled into the same framework?
Good question. We're going to talk about that.
Can
So-
I ask another question?
Yes?
The proven aspect isn't necessarily success or you apply, fail.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So whenever people ask me that, like, okay, what's the chances that I'll succeed? I say, well, if you were to go on a diet and exercise program that's proven, what are the chances that it will work for you? Right? I can tell you that it's failed for me. But that's not because of the program, it's because of me. Right? So a lot of this depends on how much gusto, with how much discipline you apply to it. Okay, so where this comes from is the combination of years of field practice with lean thinking, agile development, product development flow, and it's kind of combining all these things together and coming up with the Scaled Agile Framework. And here's what people are saying about it. People that have applied it, these are kind of their own words, right? So John Deere applied it and said that we're getting significant increase in employee engagement. We experienced 20 to 50% increase in productivity. This is BMC software. Agile teams averaged 37 to 50% faster to market. And then Agile programs introduced 50% less defects into production. To Paul's point though, I mean, this is kind of sounds like propaganda, and it is, but not everybody is succeeding yet. Okay? It all depends on your leadership, depends on how much seriousness you apply it. Just like a diet and exercise program. If you've seen the book that I bought years ago, it's called Fitness for Life or Body for Life. Body for Life. If you see it at the bookstore, it's got all these before and after pictures. I mean, hundreds of them. Of people that applied this Body for Life method in 12 weeks. They got these incredible results. But it's a lot of hard work. You know, and the thing is, when you start seeing results, when you go on these programs, these good diet and exercise programs, how long does it take to get results? Do you think?
Week to 10 days.
Actually, I think you see results right away. I mean, if you're eating, if you clean up your diet, if you start exercising, you start feeling it right away. Visible results will take a while. And that's how it is with a lot of the stuff we're talking about. There's results come immediately. But if you're actually measuring, like, okay, well, how much did our profit go up? Those kind of metrics, those things take a while to kick in. So now I'm going to dive into what is this actually, the Scaled Agile Framework, and how is it different than Scrum? If you're familiar with Scrum, it's basically defined sort of very simply this way, that you have a backlog. So this is like a to-do list. You take items from that to-do list and you say, well, how much of that to-do list can I apply and do in a 2-week period? And that becomes your sprint backlog. And then for 2 weeks you work on those items, and at the end of that 2 weeks, you have something that you can show. So that's your demoable product. And then you start again, another 2 weeks, and you have another short list of items to work on, and so forth. So this is for one team. Now, this is a Scaled Agile Framework, slightly more complex, okay? But at the very bottom level, this team level, so there's 3 levels. It's the team level, the program level, and the portfolio level. So at the team level, it's exactly this, but it's for multiple teams. So Mitchell International, for instance, they have 55 teams. Okay, they have over 500 people as part of their Scaled Agile program. So at the very bottom of the team level, they're doing Scrum. But what the Scaled Agile Framework introduces is this program tier and also a portfolio tier. So tonight we're going to just talk about the program tier. So the way it does this is it says, okay, we're going to take the business strategy, and for our business strategy, we're going to create multiple programs. Okay, so think of a company like Apple. You know, they don't just have the iPhone. They have the iPhone, they have the iPod, they have the laptops, they have Apple TV. So each of those think of those as separate programs. So program is the large thing that the company makes. So think about the companies that you work for. It's not just the thing that you're building, it's a combination of that and other things that kind of go together as a solution to your customers. All right, so Paul, what is the product that your company makes? You were describing it to me?
Right, so we develop software that takes in data from medical devices, basically telling us how you slept last night.
So there's a website component, but there's also like a hardware component to that?
Well, the device is a CPAP machine that you have to, breathe on, that helps you breathe at night so you can sleep better. So the hardware is manufactured, it has firmware on it to report statistics to us the next day about how well you slept. And then our software is in San Diego. gives you the user interface of viewing that data.
Right, so it's a combination of all of that with your customer, not just the software, but a combination of the hardware, the software, there's
So our
other
customer,
pieces.
right, there are various customers in this scenario too. So the customer, the user of the CPAP machine, so you can get a good night's sleep, may or may not be interested in the data. The insurance company, so that money may flow through the system, is very interested in compliance data. Did you use it in the last 30 days for X hours per night? The doctor is more interested in, well, is it actually treating the disease? Is it helping you sleep at night? Does he need to make adjustments on it so that you may sleep better?
Right, so
Three different
that's,
customers.
that's a great example of a program, because it's a combination of what we would call products that go together that bring the value to the customer. So for every portfolio item, there's multiple programs that actually produce the value for the company. And then for each program, we have multiple teams that are on them. And so this is how we get to scaling. So for instance, my client Mitchell International, they have a portfolio, and it's got 5 programs. Each program has about 150 or so people on it, distributed between San Diego and Delhi. So these things are big, right? And you got to be able to organize them in such a way that they're actually building value and not wasting time. So where I'm going to focus the rest of this talk on is at this program level, and how the Scaled Agile Framework builds this level of governance on top of the teams, so that you can have collaboration not just among the team members but between the teams. All right. So a typical Agile team will have 5 to 9 team members. So the team members are cross-functional, so you have not only developers, but you have testers. You might even have somebody that wears an architect's hat. Then you have these characters at the bottom, the product owner and the scrum master. So the product owner is the one that brings in the requirements into this team, and he lives with the team.
How come both of them lost their hair?
They thought too hard.
Yeah.
Good observation. So when you scale these things, you end up with multiple teams, right? So you still have the same composition, this cross-functional team, but now you have, in this example, you have 9 teams. Now, when they were small like this, they were self-managed. So they didn't have somebody to nobody was standing over them and saying, okay, you write the code for the website, okay, you go work on the firmware. The team itself was self-organizing and doing this. The problem is when we get into having 9 teams, these 9 teams we're observing these 9 teams don't self-organize. Each one of them kind of stays in their own cell, and they're self-organized within their team, but they don't automatically start self-organizing as a larger team of teams. So they actually need some leadership. And so the Scaled Agile Framework introduces some new roles. And the first role is a familiar one, product manager. So this is an industry kind of standard term that the Scaled Agile Framework reintroduces and says, actually a program needs a product manager. Somebody that talks to the clients, somebody that's familiar with the domain of the market, and is the content authority, and says, okay, here's what we're going to build. Final. They have the final say on what gets built. You also have a system architect. So one of the notions in Agile that came out with the Agile Manifesto was that architectures are emergent. And this is a really interesting concept. In other words, instead of that the best software programs emerge, their architecture emerges. It's not that somebody comes down a mountain and says, okay, here's how we're going to build it. But it starts out slow, and as the needs arise, the architecture kind of reconfigures itself, and it sort of grows, it evolves over time. But when you have very large systems, you need somebody to actually be that overall architect. So a good example is, if you think about how cities emerge, right? These ancient cities, how do they emerge? Or even American cities, you know, like on the East Coast. They emerge as small communities, usually next to a river, you know, for a water source. You know, you have a few families would gather, and then they would have a farm. They would farm the land. They would eat off the land, and then after a while, you know, more families would come. They would build a schoolhouse, a church. They would build maybe a store and be able to trade. And so the cities would emerge. But after you get to a certain size, okay, now you need to build roads. Now you need to build communication infrastructure. Now you need to standardize on how are we gonna monetize and how are we gonna trade. So now you need a governance body, and that's what the Scaled Agile Framework brings, is that after a certain size, you actually need some serious governance. And now not only do you need a content authority, but you also need an implementation authority. So in the software context, you need somebody that says, okay, are we gonna develop in Java or .NET? Of course it's gonna be Java, right? Somebody needs to decide, if we're gonna use Java, what sort of which version of Java are we gonna use? How are we gonna use a framework like Spring on top of it, or are we just gonna go with plain vanilla Java?
So how are these different than their traditional roles, or is this the same?
This is actually similar to their traditional role. There was actually wisdom in having these original ones. But it's different than the Scrum model, which says actually you don't really need a system architect.
Right, they don't like to call it product manager.
Yeah, and they don't like to call it product manager. So the Scaled Agile Framework brings it back and says actually at scale, you actually need these roles. And then also you need somebody that is in charge of the user experience. You know, you need a consistent user experience throughout the application. You don't want an application that looks like 9 different teams built it. Right? You want that consistency. And so this person has user experience authority. Here's how it's going to look. Here's the fonts we're going to use. Here's the color scheme we're going to use. And it's consistent with our marketing message. And then, in addition, there's this concept of a release train engineer. So the Scaled Agile Framework uses this concept of a release train metaphor. And the idea is that this is something, a train comes on a consistent basis every day at a certain time, or every other day at a certain time. And any cargo that's ready to go on the train goes on the train. But if it's not ready, well, the train is coming again, and it can go on at that. So the release train is another name for the Scaled Agile program. And the person that's in charge of that train, or that release, is this RTE, or the release train engineer. So this is what's also known as a program manager, somebody that's in charge of a grouping of projects.
So is he technical, or is he more organizational?
It could be either. They tend to be more organizational, so they tend to come from the project management side of the house. But they also have to have some domain knowledge to be really good at their job.
Okay. These ones over here, they sound rather deterministic and top down, when the Agile's usually bottoms up.
Yes.
How does that work together instead of clash?
Yeah, so you really want to have both, right? You want to have the emergent architecture, but at some point, those emergent architectures need to be combined. Right? So it's kind of like if you look at the analogy of the cities emerging.
Right.
At some point, now somebody has to be the referee and say, okay, you know, you want to drive on the left side of the road, or you guys are already driving on the left side. These guys are driving on the right side of the road. Okay, so we have to come up with a uniform way, because we really can't. We can't drive from one part of the city to another unless we can have some kind of a conformity.
So that's my question. Are they really consolidators or facilitators of a common experience, common architecture, or are they deterministic? They actually
No.
prescribe it?
No, so the style of leadership under the Scaled Agile Framework is more of a servant leadership, so that they are more of a, okay, let's talk about, what are the benefits and what are the pros and cons. But at some point, you have to put your foot down.
Right.
And say, here's the way it's gonna be. I'm sorry that you disagree, but we have to have one way here. Another example is, for instance, what kind of installer are you going to use? If your product is a thick client, you might have components that have their own installers, but now we need a uniform way of installing or licensing, right? You can't have multiple components licensed different ways. You need a consistent licensing scheme.
Right.
Or if you're going to have a cloud offering, is it going to be Azure? Is it going to be Amazon? Is it going to be your own hand-rolled way of doing it? There's got to be consistency at some point, and that's what the architect does.
Okay.
So then you have these other two teams here. You have a system team, which is configuration management. It's being able to do end-to-end testing. These are large programs, so you need to be able to pull all the assets together and be able to test them end-to-end, deploy them end-to-end. And then you need a release management team that says, okay, is the quality good or bad? Is our customer ready to receive it? So there's a lot more moving parts. So you need these different roles as a way to govern the program's output.
Are they independent or are they under the RTE?
The whole program is under the RTE. Now, they don't report to him. It's not like he's the boss, but he's the guy that coordinates it. He's sort of what the Scrum Master is at the team level. He's at the program level. So a lot of the thinking here is that whatever works at the team, think of that. If you guys know what a fractal is, I'm sure a lot of you guys know what a Mendelbot fractal. I don't have a picture of it, but it's the same geometric shape. If you zoom in, it's the same geometric shape. If you zoom out, it's the same geometric shape. So whatever works at the small level, at the program level, there's corresponding roles. So how are we doing on time? 5 to 8, okay, and we're gonna take a break. 8 o'clock, okay. So let's talk about the backlog. The backlog for the Scrum teams, if you remember, was this to-do list. Now, we have the same idea. We have to-do lists also at the big level. So, but at the Scaled Agile Framework, the to-do list starts out with a very large to-do list at a business strategy level, and it breaks down into what can be done at a team level. So at a business strategy level, businesses will have usually multiple parallel sort of allocation of where they're putting their R&D dollars. So you take a company like Amazon, they'll have a part of their R&D dollars could be for their bread and butter, their retail store, right? Their online retail store. Another one would be for their whole Kindle readers and Kindle Fire. Another one would be for their elastic computing, their whole Amazon EC2 offering, where you can have your cloud hosted by them. Right, so that's kind of at the business strategy level, and each of these wedges have a number of epics. So the epics are the very, very large things that they work on. But those epics then break down into multiple features. Right, so a feature would be more like, okay, we're gonna have a way of buying stuff on Amazon with multiple credit cards. You could say, I want to use one credit card. So if you're purchasing something that's $1,000, you say, I want to buy $500 with one credit card and the remainder on another credit card. That would be a feature. That would be at the program level. And you might have lots and lots of those features. Those get assigned, those get broken down into user stories that are even smaller, and then the teams execute on those user stories. So investment themes, features, and then also the other big shift from Scrum is that architecture is a first-class citizen. Architecture in traditional Agile or in Scrum were things that you did in order to support the business, the business's needs. And developers were expected to just do that on the side, sort of out of the goodness of their heart, sort of a thing. Whereas Scaled Agile Framework says that actually if you want to succeed as a business, you need to pay very close attention to architecture. And in order to remain agile, you need to pay very close attention to having a really solid architecture so you can build features in the future. Okay, so it talks about this architecture runway. So if you want a mobile solution in 2014, well, you better start putting that architecture together now. Right, so there's a lot of kind of forethought into, if you want something middle of next year that it's big. So what's another big thing? Anybody integrating with Salesforce.com? Nobody? Anybody implementing Oracle Financials? Anybody merging with another company and have to merge their financial system with theirs?
Do you have some?
Yeah, so finally, I got a hit. Yeah, so these are very big things, right? It's not something you can do in a 2-week period or a 2-month period, and it requires a lot of infrastructure development. So what the Scaled Agile Framework says is you got to start thinking about that runway. So using that same metaphor, if you're going to run a train, you need to put the tracks down first. And that might mean 6 months to a year of actually putting tracks down so that you can actually go over it and offer the business features when they're needed. All right, so the time box. So the time boxing is an element of Agile that says, human beings are natural procrastinators. So in order to have a productive team, you got to recognize that. This started, if you remember in the college days, if a paper was due in 2 months' time, when did you start working on it? What's the right answer? Night before, of course. Get that pot of coffee going, and you just work on it. So because of that, that's the way human beings are. Agile just says, hey, we got a time box thing. So even if something's not due for 6 months, we're going to implement it every 2 weeks. We're going to give ourselves a 2-week deadline, all the way, 2 weeks at a time until the customer's ready to receive it, and we're ready to ship it. So Scaled Agile does the same thing, but it does that at 2 levels, right? So it has the concept of a small iteration and then a big iteration. And the small iteration, it calls just what Scrum calls it, an iteration or a sprint, which is a 2-week period. But then it's got this big iteration, which is a 10-week period, right? And 10 weeks is about the time, how long it takes for a lot of large company customers to receive like a new version of the software. Now it can be done more quickly, more frequently or less frequently, but that's about the cadence that we want to be able to deliver at. Small things every 2 weeks, but then the big things that are customer facing every 10 weeks. So here's sort of that Scrum, sort of the Scrum Time Box. And what we do here is if we make this, think of this as 3 teams that are doing 2-week sprints, right? They're doing 4 2-week sprints. And what we have here is, so we start out with a release plan. So the 10-week thing we call a release. We start out with a release plan at the beginning, and then we have a demo of the release at the end. And the backlog that we have, this to-do list that we have for the program, they're they're big things, right? There might be, they might be things like, we need the ability to, like Siri. That would be a feature. So Siri would be a feature. What's another latest feature of the iPhone? Chrome support?
Flashlight is awesome.
The flashlight. Now that was worth waiting for. But yeah, anything that's customer facing is usually something that takes a while to develop. You can think about the things that are of actual value to your customers. They're usually not things that one person or a team could do in 2 weeks. They usually take a while to develop. So, and that's what's defined here on the backlog. And then the person that defines these is the product manager and the system architect. So either they're polling the customer community, or even internally, if some of these ideas came internally, they're the gatekeepers of what actually not goes in. They might solicit input, but they make the final call on what actually goes into the product. Okay? And then what the teams do is, at the release planning time, they'll take those big items and they'll break them down into the smaller things that the teams can actually consume. So for instance, if the flashlight's going to be, if that's their feature, it's something small to us, but probably there's a lot of technical details that went into that. There's that fancy user interface, right? There's a button and whatnot, but then that's got to get wired into the OS, and there's probably all kinds of other failure conditions that they have to watch for. And then, so that goes into each team's backlog. And so these teams are building these things incrementally. So imagine that if we have 10 teams, each team is starting and stopping at the same time, and they have their own backlog. And one of the teams is kind of also bringing together the assets that the other teams produce. So the system team is actually incrementally building what's going to be the final product. Okay. And the cool thing about that is you always have a running system. It's not like these teams are blindly developing and hoping that someday they'll be able to integrate. Things are getting integrated as they're being developed. And they're able to demo the system as it's being built. So if management wants to know, okay, so what's everybody working on, they can go and look at the system demo, and they can see the program's progress. Okay. So here's our 10 weeks of development that's going on. At the end, we have a big box. So each team is producing these little boxes. Well, at the end, the entire program produces a big box, and that's called a potentially shippable increment, a new TLA for your notebook. So potentially shippable increment, what that means is that this is something that you can demo independently, and it has value to your customer. However, it might not be enough value for your customer to take yet, right? So that's why it's potentially shippable. In other words, the quality is there, it's feature complete. However, your customer might say, well, I'm only interested in that. But let's say, for instance, if you told somebody, okay, upgrade to the latest iPhone, and for $100, and they say, well, what do I get for that? You say, well, you get a flashlight. I'm guessing they probably wouldn't fork out $100 for a flashlight. They want a set of different features before they're willing to pay out the $100. So that's how this goes. Is even though it's potentially shippable, your customer may not be quite ready to receive it. Okay, so I think everyone's kind of getting jittery. Maybe it's a good time to take a break, and then when we come back, we'll talk about the rest of the time box.